Hello, everybody. My name is Heather, and I am here for Helpful Heather with my very first book review. Yay! I'm so excited. Hopefully, one of many, many, many. So, today we're going to be reviewing Little. Little, da 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 da. Look at that little girl. By Edward Carey, was born in England, but he now lives in the United States. Excellent book. I highly, highly recommend it. So let's delve into a little bit about Little. It's loosely based off of the life of Marie. Let's see. If you can see it. Marie Tussaud. Now, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it, but Marie Tussaud was born in Switzerland. She moved to Paris with her mother, and she lived during the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, and eventually ended up in England, where she passed away at 80-something years old, so she lived a good life. Now, the book starts off with her birth to her mother and father. Now, her father was away in a war, and in real life, supposedly her father passed away before he got to meet her, before she was born. But in the book, after she was a couple years old, he came back and died at their house, and she ended up inheriting this faceplate. Oh, it was a little sketchy. But, so then she lived with her mother, and her mother, they were in Switzerland, and they were poor, and so her mother ended up going to work for this doctor, who is Dr. Courteous, who was Swiss. So let me find a picture of him for you. Now, what made him special was he was the son of a famous surgeon. Here we go. He looks a little creepy in this paper, in this page. But he was the son of a doctor. Now, he was a doctor, but he didn't practice medicine. What he did was he made organs, especially diseased organs, into waxworks for medical students so that they could study it. And then, so the mother and Marie Little ended up coming to work for him and like cleaning, housekeeping, and she got interested in doing the waxwork with him. Well, then one day he started doing faces, heads, and the guy that was in charge of the hospital did not like that and was threatening him, telling him he needed to move to the hospital. He would owe them lots of money. Well, in the meantime, Marie's mother hung herself because she was so sad, I think. So she hung herself. So this doctor had this little girl, and they fled to Paris, where they met a Monsieur Mercier, who they had met previously in Switzerland. And he took them to a house ran by the widow Picot, who had a young son named Edmund. Now, the widow was kind of mean and nasty to Little. She was not nice, and the doctor and Little lived with this widow and her son. Now, the doctor was completely in love with the widow, or he grew to love her over time. And the widow was just mean to Little. And during this time period, she was not allowed to work with the doctor. She was ended up being a kitchen slave, and where she had to do all types of household stuff. Now the widow hated Marie and made her life miserable. But Little ended up falling in love with Edmund, and I think he fell in love with her as well. She spoke German, but he was teaching her French in secret. She tried to practice drawing too, and she would steal like papers from the widow and practice drawing because she really wanted to be with the doctor and learn his traits. So then they were living in a tailor shop, and the widow decided that they would move into this, what's known as a monkey house. What made it a monkey house was that it used to be a house ran by this man who loved monkeys, and he put on exhibits of the live monkeys, but I think he was killing the monkeys, and it was just so sad for these poor monkeys. And I don't know if she was able to talk to the spirits, but it was implied that she could communicate with the house. So from there, they moved in, the four of them, Edmund, the widow, the doctor, and Little. And from this, the doctor decides that they were going to start waxing. And Mercer was their first head that they displayed. And he did other famous people like Benjamin Franklin, Voltaire, and the Mercier. But then they decided to do his first murderer. And his first murderer was this little man who killed people by poisoning hot chocolate. And before they hung him back then, because that was the way to do it before the guillotine was invented, they took a whole body wax and they displayed it, but in a separate part of the house, and it drew crowds. And then one day, this little boy called the Wild Boy, who is Jackie Bouvage. Oh, I don't know. I can't pronounce it, but ironically, he was an orphan who lived with dogs, and they named his last name was Bouvage, which is supposed to be beautiful face in French, but it was supposed to be a word on play on words because he wasn't very attractive. But when he came in, Little befriended him and kind of was a mother figure to him. Now, he would play an important part in the French Revolution, even though he was fictionalized in the book. Now, everybody I've been talking about is supposedly lived in the real life. So they would cast famous people. Edmund, so years go by, and each chapter, or each major chapter is like so many years of her life. So Edmund, who is Little's love of her life, ends up marrying another woman because of the widow. And this breaks poor Little's heart because she loves him. And I think it kind of broke his heart too. So then one day, this Princess Elizabeth, who in real life is the sister of King Louis XVI of France, and you know how that ends up. That ends up pretty scary. Well, she comes to visit the monkey house to visit the waxworks. And she sees Little's, when she arrives, Little is the only one home. So, but Little isn't supposed to have anything to do with the waxwork because she's been banned to the kitchen and cleaning. Well, she takes it upon herself to show Princess Elizabeth all this cool stuff and her drawings and the waxwork, and then the widow and the doctor, and it come home, and they're like, no, we'll show you. But Princess Elizabeth loves, she just loves everything that Little shows her. And then, of course, the widow takes it out on Little after the princess leaves, and she's almost ready to kick her out when this man shows up inviting Little to come live in Versailles. So that is so excited. And that really happened in real life. She was invited to live in Versailles. And when she arrived, it was completely different. She ended up being like an art teacher, but she also taught the waxwork because she knew all about the waxes. And she taught that to Princess Elizabeth. And she even had to live in a cupboard. Oh, it was awful. But apparently that was a big thing back then. The servants lived in cupboards so that they could be readily available. And this went on for years and years. And it's really interesting because you see the relationship between the two develop. And I think in the book, it was implied that they were lesbians. But I don't know if that really happened in real life. But I know for a fact Princess Elizabeth never married. And she ended up beheaded around age 30. So that goes on. And then the sad part is that Little was never paid for her work. This whole time, all the money went to the widow and to the doctor. And so then, right before the Reign of Terror, which we know what that happened, Little was sent away from Versailles, from France, back to her home. And of course, the widow was like just ashamed of her. And then the French Revolution happened right afterwards. And of course, as we know, the king and queen and children and Princess Elizabeth and all, they tried to sneak away, but they were caught. Now, what happened was when Little was back and the storming of the Bastille, they took the defendants' heads, and they were marching in the street. And when they went by Little's house, they threw the heads at her and told her that they wanted a wax casting. So, oh God, how gruesome is that? So she ended up doing that, and that actually happened. She had to, in real life, Marie Little had to make wax castings of people that were guillotined because the guillotine was just invented. And then so she was constantly doing that through the whole reign of terror, was making waxes of different people that were killed. And then eventually she ended up having to do it to the king. Now, in the novel, while she was at Versailles, she had actually met the king, but she thought he was a locksmith, and they became really good friends. And then it was later revealed that he was actually the king. So that was pretty interesting, because I'm sure she had to have some kind of interaction with them. And then eventually everybody was guillotined in the royal family. So that happened in the Reign of Terror. And then the Jackie, who grew up, the little boy that Little loved and kind of took under her wing, he grew up and he had a son. Well, in the novel, which they say he was just a fictionalized character, but in the novel, his son was killed at one of these battles, or somebody shot him, and he went berserk, and he started like killing anybody and everybody. So, but they never told you what ended up happening to him. He became like a legend in the novel. So then what happened was after the Reign of Terror and Little and the Doctor were accused of being sympathizers to the king, and because they were Swiss, apparently then anybody who was a foreigner was looked down upon in Paris and France. So they were taken and they were put under, or they were taken to the cell with a bunch of other people and they were having daily executions. Now, Little and the widow were taken, and then the Doctor was taken to the men's prison. Well, Little ended up not being executed because at the time she was pregnant with Edmund's child, because he had left his wife, or she had kicked him out. I'm not too sure what happened, but they had an affair and she got pregnant, and they didn't execute pregnant women back then, which was a good thing. But they ended up executing the widow. Well, then Little, she was released because she knew somebody. And so I don't want to tell you too much of what the ending, because I want you to read it, but so I'll leave the ending because it was a shock and it was very awesome. And let me show you another picture. So this is actually a waxwork of her. Let's see, can you see? There we go. Oh, sorry, I'm moving it all around, but yeah, this was her as a wax work, and her legacy lives on. Now, I don't know if you visit a waxwork, but when I visited waxworks when I was a little girl growing up north, I was so scared. Like, it scared me, and it still kind of haunts me, but it is kind of cool to think that they took these waxworks of real people. So anyway, so I hope you enjoyed my review. I tried to sum it up. It's a huge book, but I highly recommend Little, and I give it a thumbs up. Yay, thank you. And I hope you read the book and let me know what you think about it. Goodbye.